Thank you very much for honoring this position. It's been such a privilege and continues to be. But I'm going to take my time today sharing with you something that some of you have already seen, or at least seen a draft of, excuse my grammar. And I want to make a call to the church, and I wish to share that with you. Those of you who have seen preliminary parts of this, let me say that as of today, it is a bit different, although the substance remains the same. When I speak as moderator of our denomination, it's critically important to understand my role. Though some of you may say that there are ways in which I have authority, and there certainly can be, I really have, by polity, no official authority in the church except to serve as the interpreter of the past General Assembly and to be the ambassador to our denomination. That's it, and it's a privilege to serve in those ways. But increasingly this year, I've been aware of another role that is expected, though not stated, for the moderator. As many of you know, my primary mission these 2 years has been to listen and to love. And I have been listening. Over and over, I've had people say, listen to our pleas for the church, and as moderator, do something about them. But my powers are limited. I'm not a bishop nor a pope, nor do I want to be. In fact, as an aside, I would imagine many more Presbyterians today could tell you the role of the Pope than they could tell you the role of the moderator of the U.S.A. But all I do have is a platform on which to stand and speak, and I continue to pray that God will allow me to use it wisely and appropriately, as my love for this church has only grown during these past months. And it's in this context that I share the following. Recently, I called together a small task force of individuals, some of you read about this, to help focus on financial support in the area of global mission. This task force was comprised of 2 former moderators, 2 seminary presidents, 2 very successful business people who are also ordained U.S.A. ministers, and a staff member who works in the area of missions, as well as myself. We began our conversation by trying to understand the current status of our global mission program, its financial condition, and if it was something where we could interject some ideas which might help forestall the crisis that we heard about at our last mission board meeting, which was to bring home mission co-workers from the field because we couldn't afford to have as many any longer. Now, I'll confess to having had a broader vision about what this role would be and what this group would do. For I knew that money in other areas of our denomination, at the national and the regional and the local levels, was also being faced and confronted with budget shortfalls. My hope was that if a model was developed for global missions, it might be applicable in other arenas of the U.S.A. So eagerly we moved forward. But what emerged was an amazing and unanimous redefinition of what we should do with our time together. Almost instantly, there developed a sense of deep urgency. There was a feeling that the issues related to funding global missions in the U.S.A. were much more intense than just what was happening in that program. It became apparent that a painful situation existed. Specifically, we believe that trust has been lost across our denomination. And for anything to be accomplished, we must find ways for that trust to be restored. It was felt that our denomination needed to explore these matters in depth, and that I should, in that spirit, announce a call to the church to help in addressing them. Mid-level judicatories, missions, and ministries across the church, individual members, pastors, educators, financial donors, church administrators, staff, and elected leaders of our national church share a common feeling that the current understanding of who we are as a denomination, as well as our system of organizational operatives for executing our mission, is not working as effectively as it should. The need for reform is urgent. As moderator, I've had in-depth conversations with people from every level of the church, and here are some of the major issues which I've identified as consistent responses. They'll not be a surprise to most of you. A, there's a profound and rapid change in the world around us that has put the church's relevance in question, not just Presbyterians, but the entire church. put the relevance in question in ways that we have not seen in our lifetime. B, not having a permanent current CEO in our mission agency and having a stated clerk who's not going to seek re-election has offered us a kairos moment which is unique. C, we are indeed facing a crisis of lack of trust across the church. This is manifested in many ways, but includes departing congregations, confused members concerning who we are as the PCUSA, disinterested local sessions who could care less about what's happening in the national church, struggling mid-councils, frustrated and anxious staff in our national offices, many of whom are wary and disillusioned, and financial supporters who are seeking other ways than our denomination in order to give their money for mission and work. D, our theological institutions who have provided a foundational element of our denomination historically are also victims of this unrest and the old models of seminary education being handled in the ways of the past by the same deliverers is under scrutiny. And E, we must act to remedy some of these matters, and we must do so with haste. I hear loudly and clearly that we do not have the luxury of time to discern and debate at length. Now, while this call necessarily involves many entities, it's important for congregation and members to know that they comprise the body of the PCUSA, and it is with them in mind that I am speaking out. I've heard their cries for change and that we seek God's will as we move forward. I know there is a disagreement, or a disconnect is a better word, between what members see and feel is happening at the national and even the middle judicatory levels. On one hand, I see our organizational leadership trying to do what we, through our General Assembly, have directed them to do. Many do their work in sacrificial ways, and they're doing what we, the church, have asked them to do. So if we feel we need to go in different directions, it's up to us to direct them accordingly through the General Assembly. And as I've observed them closely this year, I find that the extent of passion and commitment to service to God is a gift and strength, as well as it provides an incentive for others to become involved in our work. But people across the church see something else. They believe that, quote unquote, Louisville is out of touch with them, and that there is not a stable or coherent system in place for us to be the church. We need to rethink what we are asking our leadership to be and to do, and act in a way that works for all of us, and where we affirm that God's house and Christ's table is large enough for all of us who call ourselves Presbyterians to participate as we seek to do the work of the kingdom. And in fact, our table is large enough that even people who don't call themselves Presbyterians are invited. But let me also emphasize that as we do this, we need to support the ongoing mission and ministry of our denomination. We cannot just stop our work today as a church and take a year or two to figure this out. So what can be done and what is needed, and when is it needed? This call to the church does not provide the answer. I wish I had that wisdom. But is more a naming of reality, a speaking of the truth in love, and a call to change. And that, my friends, is part of what it means to be reformed and reforming as a church, a claim we should embrace. Are we listening to God's call for us to do a new thing? Are we willing to risk the comfort and in some ways the traditions of our past in order to accept our place in a resurrected church? I'm 71 years old. These traditions are very much embedded in Heath Rada. But imagine the image of living in a house which has had many rooms added over the decades. To get from one place to another, we have to go outside, walk upstairs, re-enter, go downstairs, then go through some other rooms to get to where we want to be. It seems ridiculous, but as I've been listening, it seems consistent with what many people believe is the current house in which we live as a denomination. So we need to move. We need to sort through and decide what to retain and what to give away. We're functioning with a structure and approach that was designed by a church 30 years ago, but many believe it is no longer relevant. It's time for us to awaken to the realities of who we are as a denomination in the 21st century. So what now? What might it mean for us to hit the reset button of a new church start? What might it mean for us to practice Sabbath and engage in a spiritual discipline for the church in order to discern our way? Or better yet, might we instead have a time for Jubilee, as it is depicted in Leviticus 25, which includes offerings of forgiveness, a releasing of what we have held captive, which is our current way of being the church, so that we might celebrate Jubilee, the Sabbath of Sabbath practiced every 50 years. Can we find a way to affirm a theological basis for who we are and who we are to be that embraces our uniqueness and our differences, and in that context establishes the priorities for the church? And once we settle on priorities, can we implement an organizational network that can help us carry it out? Not everything has to change, my friends. Some things are working well, but still a major overhaul is being called for by our denomination. To do this, we need to avoid territoriality. This discussion needs to occur in local congregations, in all agencies and mission areas, personnel and governing bodies, advocacy groups, at all levels of the church and in all institutions of the church. And while a sense of restlessness, of urgency is good, fear and anxiety is not. We must take bold and immediate steps, and for us Presbyterians who love to discern and debate, it's essential that a resolution be found quickly. According to our polity, the mission, vision, and structure of our denomination is to be determined by our General Assembly, which meets every 2 years. We cannot wait until this upcoming assembly to appoint a study committee to come back in 2 years with a recommendation that will take 2 years to implement. The people in the pews say, we cannot wait 4 years to get this resolved. The need is immediate. As I've traveled, many individuals in various groups have offered ideas and thoughts about what to do. We have overtures coming to this year's General Assembly, which address some of the areas related to these matters. How do we function as Christ's body, people are asking. And these overtures that are coming have been conscientiously addressed and are being brought forward and have helped to shed light on even broader issues which we are facing and need to be incorporated in whatever decisions we make. But we need a broad-based, overall, consistent understanding of how to proceed, and we must do this with the involvement of our entire church. So here's the reality. We have a polity that says our General Assembly must be the official place to implement change, while a church says we can't wait. Is there any way to move this forward, and where do we start? What is the most productive and constructive way? We are we have a polity, as I said, that will hold us almost prisoner to who we are, and yet our form of government is by far, I believe, the best form of government of any church. We are arguably the most democratic form of government of any faith community in the world, and I affirm it. But sometimes it gets in the way of our doing what we need to do, because we become captive to the process rather than to the Spirit. From my perspective, it seems appropriate that the Committee on the Office of the General Assembly help us in the first stage of this effort. They are charged with planning and implementing the Assembly's work, so it seems appropriate that they be the ones to start the process. Some group has to do it. I've met with a committee from COGA, and they are already seeking to address this. They see the need to confront this issue in an organized but urgent fashion, with essential networking and information gathering from other agencies and bodies of the denomination. I hear the concern that people feel that if we rely on one area of our denomination to take the lead in this process, that group may be tempted to control the outcome so that their interests will be served. They feel that way about every agency in the church. It isn't COGA that's being condemned. Instead, it's a general suspicion and unrest with our system. And when the Committee on the Office of the General Assembly discussed tackling this issue, they recognized that their position needed to be clear and that needed to have no bias nor preferred outcome from them should there be, and that they should not have any more influence than those of other bodies. And I want to share with you that I'm convinced that they believe this. I have had the privilege of sitting with them in helping to talk about how this can happen, and I know that their intent is to utilize objective processes and procedures to help us hear the will of God through our membership. So what suggested specific steps should we take now? First, again, let me state the obvious. Someone has to take the lead. Just talking about it isn't going to get it done. So I'm asking that our denomination affirm and actively participate in the COGA process, which is getting ready to be unveiled and which will undertake the massive task of assessing the church's will in accordance with God's will concerning who and what we need to be as a denomination. And on the side, I would add that one of our members, who is a representative of COGA to this group, is Eileen Lindner, who is here today. And Eileen has been strategically involved in helping us look at how a process can be developed. It's one of her extraordinary gifts to understand statistical as well as other types of thinking in ways that ultimately can have a theological base and come back to the church. And it is through Eileen and these other members that I'm convinced that they and you have been heard and they wish to hear more, not dictate a future outcome. I'm asking that we trust this process unless, as it is implemented, we find reason not to do so. I'm also asking the other 5 agencies of the church through their executives and their boards, as well as all bodies of the church, to affirm this effort, even knowing that it may bring about some dramatic suggested changes. Our denomination needs to trust that we can and will work together and not focus primarily on issues which divide us or protect turf. Now, let me add that there are other initiatives which are currently being brought forward by some of the other agencies. It's my hope that these might complement the study of COGA. One is a survey being undertaken by our Mission Agency Board, which is seeking to find ways to determine our future priorities. We are deliberately seeking ways to be faithful in response to the very challenging and upsetting issues which we have faced or addressed, and to serve the church in ways that the church is wanting. How this effort will interface with the overall study of COGA should be coordinated in ways that do not confuse the church nor compete with one another. Number 2, I ask our church members, local sessions, middle governing bodies, advocacy groups, agency boards, institutional members, people who have felt disenfranchised, people from different theological positions and different cultural and racial backgrounds, staff members at the local and national level, and all others who care about our denomination to participate actively and expeditiously in order that we might gather data which can help our Portland Assembly next June make informed and healthy decisions about our future. Number 3, I will be starting a series of moderator chats. Now, these aren't fireside chats. Maybe they should occur around a communion table or a baptismal font. But I propose that we have scheduled talkback sessions with the moderator as well as the vice moderator, along with some other people in leadership positions in the church, where various groups of our denomination will be able to share their visions and concerns and their ideas and their hopes, so that we might rebuild trust in our church and move forward. Groups should include, but not be limited to, the Next Church and the Covenant Network and the Fellowship Community, middle governing board staff, advocacy groups, national staff members, agency boards, pastors, representatives from both large and small churches, Christian educators, church administrators, representatives from publications, seminaries, youth, and the list goes on. They should also represent the extraordinary diversity which is including our Native Americans, which has been and is increasingly becoming a critical part of our identity, and not be the voice only of the privileged who have comprised the majority of membership in our denomination for years. These will be open conversations, meaning that if they are focused on some particular group, others may listen in, and we will seek ways to have their issues and concerns raised as conversations ensue. And I ask, number 4, that seminaries, presbytery executives, church-related colleges, camp and conference centers work together to help sponsor and participate in regional gatherings with commissioners elected to the 222nd General Assembly. Again, as an aside, if you are not aware, we are electing commissioners earlier this year than we ever have, or at least in recent years. And so people are going to have more time to prepare. I am recommending that we find resources and ways to gather people together face to face so that they might prioritize their work and begin to develop priorities as well as a process to develop a system for the reformed PCUSA, which may be both feasible and adequate. This may be a part of the COGA plan, which they're going to unveil to us soon. And as we do this, we need to remember that we are now a denomination of 1.7 million people rather than 5 million people. That does not mean we're a weaker church, but it does mean that we have dramatically less resources than we had just a few years ago. Yet too many of us expect our denomination to operate in the same manner it always has. That's both unrealistic and unfair to those who serve us. And finally, number 5, I ask that we ask our various agencies to allow their communication departments in each agency to assist us in advocating participation and involvement in this conversation of who we are as a church, and to help us in sharing the effort. I firmly believe that communication in 2015 and 16 is key, essential, in order for us to restore trust and to be credible and transparent and allow people to know what's going on. As I said earlier, I don't have the authority to dictate how this process occurs. Actually, I don't have the authority to call for any of this action, and some who hear of my call may feel I'm overstepping my bounds. They'd be right. But I do believe firmly that we need to act and act now, and I believe that the platform affirmed the Moderator affirms or even demands that I extend this call and challenge. We must make immediate decisions which will allow the 222nd Assembly in Portland to be able to deal realistically with many of the issues before us so they can act, not just appoint study commissions and refer this to ongoing committees. From all across the church, our membership has said we don't have that luxury. I also wish to share that this will be a priority for the remaining months of my moderatorial term and may require that I alter some of my engagements that have already been booked across the church. I grieve that fact, but I feel called to be responsive to this matter, and that is in an essential place where God has called me to be at this moment. So I say to you, let us step out in faith. Let us find ways to move this effort forward. Let us realize that if we make some decisions that don't work as we had hoped, we can change them. That's not the end of the world. It's a part of our governing process to make changes and to alter direction when we believe it's important. But let us not act as the frozen chosen and sit still and complain or opt out of participation. God is calling us to action. Do you hear? Can you join in? Whatever avenue is chosen to advance this effort, the honest fact remains that it must happen and the time is now. May God guide us all, as well as the church which we and God love. Thank you.